Please don't take it." Those were the first scared words that came out of 12-year-old Emma's shaking lips as tears ran down her cheeks, hot and heavy from a fear she could hardly keep inside. She stood alone at an old bus stop on a dusty part of a forgotten highway. It was a place where cars hardly ever went by, and help seemed farther away every minute. Her small arms held a worn blue backpack tight. She held it so tight that her little knuckles turned white, like her life depended on it. And in a way, it did. The afternoon sun beat down hard, baking the cracked road and making the world look wavy with heat. Sweat ran down the side of Emma's face, but she did not dare let go or even move her feet. Her legs were tired from hours of walking. Her tongue was dry. Her heart was beating fast from panic and being so tired. She had been up since the sun came up, and every moment since had been a bad dream she still could not believe was real. Then a rumble. A sound cut through the quiet like a threat. Engines. More than one engine. Deep growling. Powerful. Nothing like the soft hum of a car or the chirp of a passing moped. These sounded like thunder tearing across the road. Emma got stiff right away. A long curve of the highway was just past the bus stop, and from around it came a group of big Harley motorcycles. Their shiny metal gleamed like knives in the sunlight. The riders were wide-shouldered, strong, and dressed in leather vests covered in patches. Their boots were worn, their jeans were heavy, and the tattoos on their arms showed in the light like dark snakes. The dust kicked up behind the tires as they braked hard beside her. Emma froze. The leader of the group, a tall, scary man with a thick beard and eyes hidden under a steel gray bandana, got off his motorcycle. His leather jacket had a name across the back that every local knew. Razor. Even people who had never met him knew the stories. Some said he ran the town from the shadows. Some said he had been in more fights than anyone could count. Some said you never looked him in the eye unless you were ready to suffer. No one knew the truth. No one dared to ask. But to a scared 12-year-old girl alone on the highway, Razor looked like the last problem in a day already full of trouble. Emma took a step back, holding her bag even tighter, fresh tears burning in her eyes. She had been waiting for a bus that never came. She had not known what else to do. She had no family nearby, no phone, no neighbors close enough to call for help. Just her grandfather, William, lying on the kitchen floor back at home, pale and not awake, his breathing weak and uneven. The picture would not leave her mind. Earlier that morning, she had shaken him, pushed him, cried his name, begged him to get up, but nothing worked. Scared and alone, she grabbed everything she thought might save him and ran out the door. Miles of road later, her legs hurt, her lungs ached, and she still had no help. Now she had bikers instead, and they did not look like the kind of people a girl should trust. Razor slowly took off his helmet, showing a face made hard by years most people could not imagine. He had a scar along his jaw, and his eyes, though strict and strong, held a bit of surprise at seeing a crying child alone in such a place. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his voice deep and gravelly, like someone who had smoked more cigarettes than he could count and yelled over motorcycle engines his entire life. Emma did not answer. She could not. She just shook her head, fingers tightening around the fraying straps of her backpack, as if letting go meant losing everything she had left in the world. Razor took a slow step forward, hands open so she could see he was not carrying a weapon. Despite his scary look, his movements were careful, not threatening, almost gentle. "What you got in there?" he asked, glancing at the blue bag. Emma's knees wobbled. Her breath caught. Terror shook through her. What if they stole it? What if someone finally took the one thing she had managed to carry with her? "Please," she sobbed, voice cracking painfully. "I can't give it to you." The men behind Razor exchanged looks, some curious, some suspicious, one or two even amused. To them, she was just a scared kid protecting something she thought was valuable. Razor, however, did not smile. He looked closer, really looked. He saw the tiredness in her posture, the calloused blisters on her feet, visible through the openings in her worn shoes, the dried mud on her legs from where she had stumbled, the panic in her eyes, the kind that did not come from fear of strangers, but from something much deeper, much more urgent. "What's your name?" he asked, voice softer now. Emma licked her dry lips. "Emma. You out here alone, Emma?" She nodded. "You running away?" A sharp shake of her head. Razor frowned. "Then what happened?" For a long moment, Emma said nothing. The sounds of motorcycles cooling in the heat filled the silence. Metal ticking softly, engines settling, dust drifting. Finally, in a voice so small Razor had to lean in to hear her, she whispered, "My grandpa, he collapsed. Couldn't wake him up. I tried to call the ambulance, but the phone wasn't working. I didn't know what to do." Her throat tightened and she sniffed, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. "I packed everything a hospital would need, his medicine, his papers, the machine he's supposed to wear. I carried it all so they wouldn't refuse him." She swallowed, eyes shining with fear. "If I lose this bag, he might die." Razor stood very still. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. His jaw clenched, and for a second, he seemed to be seeing something far beyond the moment. Something from his own past, something buried, but not forgotten. Behind him, one of the bikers muttered, "Boss, what do we do?" Razor did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the tiny girl holding more weight than most adults could carry physically and emotionally. "Emma," he said quietly, "no one here is going to take your bag." She hesitated, not sure she could believe him. But he continued, "You shouldn't be out here alone. Let us help." Emma clutched her backpack like a shield. "You don't understand," she said, voice breaking again. "If someone opens it, everything will fall out and I won't be able to put it back right, and the doctors might not believe me." And her breathing sped up into shallow gasps. Razor held up a hand. "Emma, you've done everything you could. Now let us do something." The wind carried a moment of silence across the empty road. The girl stared at him into the eyes of the man people feared most and realized something she had not expected. He was not threatening her. He was worried. And for the first time that day, she was not completely alone. Anyone in town would have told you that Razor was not the kind of man you messed with. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. Bar owners turned down the music and watched the door whenever he and his crew walked in. Kids growing up in the area whispered stories about him at sleepovers. Stories of fights that left opponents crawling out the back door, of debts paid with bruises instead of money, and of quiet warnings delivered in the dead of night. But that was just the thing. No one knew for sure. The rumors were louder than any truth. Razor never bragged. He never confirmed anything. He never denied anything either. He lived the kind of life people were simply too afraid to ask questions about. A history written in other people's whispers. So when Razor stood in front of Emma, a towering figure of rough edges and leather, it made sense that her small body shook the way it did. Razor had seen fear before plenty of times from grown men even. But something about her fear hit differently. This was not the fear of someone who had been caught doing something wrong or someone who thought they were about to be punished. This was fear rooted in survival. Fear that came from responsibility too heavy for someone her age to carry. He looked closer. There were bruises on her knees, faint purplish marks that had not come from abuse, but from falling probably multiple times. The dust streaking her legs and shoes showed she had been walking for hours, not minutes. Her lips were dry, cracked, her face pale with exhaustion. And that backpack, she held it as if it were the only thing in the world keeping her together. Razor tilted his head. "You hungry?" he asked, softening his usually sharp tone. Emma stared at the ground, blinking fast. She did not answer. He did not push. Hunger was not her main problem. Not now. He could see that much. Fear and exhaustion had hollowed her eyes in a way that made her look older and younger at the same time. Too young to be carrying whatever burden she was carrying. Behind Razor, the other bikers shifted, forming a loose half-circle around Emma. To them, she was just a strange thing to stumble upon. A girl alone, far from town, crying her soul out and gripping a bag like treasure. One biker, Scar, called that because of the long mark running down the side of his scalp, leaned forward and muttered under his breath. Probably a runaway. And that bag's got to have something valuable in it. Razor did not even turn his head. He just shot Scar a sideways look, sharp, cold warning. Scar instantly shut his mouth and stepped back. Razor lowered himself slowly, knees bending until he was eye level with Emma, a position he almost never put himself in. Not for cops, not for rivals. But right now, looking down on this kid would only make things worse. He rested his forearms on his knees. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." Emma's chin quivered before she finally lifted her eyes. Her gaze was red from crying. But there was something else, too. Something determined. She was terrified, but she was not giving an inch. She would hold on to that bag until her fingers bled if she had to. "I'm not here to hurt you," Razor said. "None of us are. You can trust me." Her grip tightened, the opposite of trust. Her shoulders raised defensively. She took a step backward, turning so she could keep everyone in sight at the same time. Razor sighed. He had seen criminal informants, desperate debtors, gamblers who had lost everything, men cornered by their own mistakes. But this kid, she was not like any of them. She was protecting something and she was scared to death of losing it. Razor slowly spread his palms outward, showing he had nothing in them. "Listen, kid," he said. "No one's taking anything from you, but you're out here alone, and that means something's wrong. We can help if you tell us what's going on." Emma swallowed hard. He saw her throat bob as she struggled to hold herself together. She looked like someone standing on the edge of two worlds. One where she stayed quiet and protected her secret, and one where she risked everything by speaking. Her eyes brimmed again. Razor waited. He did not push further. Sometimes silence was the best pry bar. Finally, her lips parted and her voice cracked thin with the weight of everything she had been carrying alone. "My grandpa," she whispered. "He needs help." Razor's brow furrowed. Emma clutched her backpack tighter, as though even saying the words made her fear it slipping away. "He collapsed this morning," she said, her voice trembling. "He could not move, would not respond. I tried calling the ambulance, but the phone did not work. The power went out last week and never came back on. He always said we'd be fine, but we weren't." Her throat hitched. She wiped her nose with the back of her wrist. "I shook him. I tried to make him wake up, but he didn't. I didn't know what to do." She took a shuddering breath. Razor noticed her legs wobbling. He also noticed the hint of guilt in her eyes, the kind no child should ever carry. "So, I packed his important things, the papers the hospital needs, his medicine," her voice quivered, "and the machine he's supposed to wear. I put it all in here because if the hospital doesn't see it, they won't help him. Grandpa told me that once." Razor's expression shifted again. The bikers behind him exchanged glances. Awkward, uncertain. Kids weren't their world. Bikes, bars, back alley. Negotiations. Those were familiar. But a little girl walking miles alone with her grandfather's survival in a backpack. That was something none of them had expected to face today. Emma's fingers dug into the straps of her bag. "My mom died when I was little," she said quietly. "Grandpa is the only one I have left. If something happens to him, I don't have anyone." Razor was struck silent. His gaze moved from her face to the worn bag to the bruises on her kneecaps to the dusty stretch of road she'd walked alone. This wasn't a runaway. This wasn't a thief. This was a kid trying to save the only person she loved. Razor had walked through a lot of his life, done things, seen things, survived things. But in that moment, seeing Emma holding more responsibility than any grown man he knew, something inside him shifted. He stood slowly and nodded once. "All right," he said gently. "We're going to help you." Emma's lower lip trembled. She did not fully relax, but a spark of hope flickered behind the fear. For the first time that day, she was not alone. Razor straightened up, towering over Emma once again. But now he was not just an intimidating figure with leather and tattoos. He was a man trying to understand a terrified little girl's desperation. "Where is he?" Razor asked, his voice low but strangely gentle. "At home," Emma whispered. Her shoulders trembled as the words came out. "He collapsed. This morning. I didn't know what to do. Couldn't wake him up. I tried to call an ambulance, but the phone didn't work." Razor's thick brows pulled together. He looked over his shoulder at his men, and for the first time since arriving there was something like shock in his eyes. The roughest biker among them hissed out a breath. Their world was built on loud engines, bar fights, worn roads, and hard choices. But a child alone with a medical emergency, that was something else entirely. Emma held the bag tighter as if every memory, every fear, every urgent need was sewn into its seams. She continued, her voice shaking like a creaking door. I packed everything important in my bag. His medicine, his papers, his special heart monitor. Her fingers clutched the straps until her hands trembled. If I lose it, the hospital won't help him. And then Razor understood. All the fear in her eyes, all the panic in her breathing, the tears she'd been fighting since the moment he rode up. She wasn't protecting the backpack because she was scared of bikers. She was protecting it because it represented her grandfather's life. Without it, she had nothing. Razor nodded once slowly, letting the truth sink in. His men looked between Emma and their leader, unsure what to do now. This wasn't the kind of situation their reputation had prepared them for. He asked, "So, why are you out here alone?" Emma scrubbed at her face with her sleeve, leaving streaks of dust on her cheeks. "Grandpa always told me never to talk to strangers," she said. "Never ask for help unless I had no choice." But her voice cracked. "But I have to now." Razor's eyes shifted to the empty road behind her. A long stretch of cracked asphalt disappearing in heat waves. No houses, no stores, no cars, just silence. She had not walked a block. She walked miles, probably for hours. One of the bikers, a stocky man with a nose that had clearly been broken more than once, spoke up. "Boss," he said, "we can take her to the hospital." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement, a duty. Razor agreed without hesitation. He stepped forward and reached for her backpack, not to open it, but simply to lift the burden off her small shoulders and secure it on the back of his motorcycle. But to Emma, that simple action wasn't harmless. She panicked instantly, yanking the bag away with surprising strength for someone so exhausted. "No," she cried, her voice shrill and terrified. "You can't open it." Razor froze, startled. His hand hovered inches away from hers. He had not tugged hard or tried to grab the bag by force, but her reaction was explosive. Too explosive for something ordinary. Behind him, his men stiffened. Their curiosity sharpened. Their instincts changed. Someone whispered, "What's in there?" Another muttered under his breath, "Maybe she's stealing something." A different biker leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "Kids hiding something." The air thickened with suspicion. Emma's breathing grew rapid. Her small body shook as she backed away, pressing her bag to her chest like a shield. Razor stood still for a moment, trying to decide how to calm the situation down. But before he could, instinct, maybe paternal, maybe protective, took over. He reached forward, not with force, but with determination. "Emma," he said softly, "I just need to see." "No," she screamed, tears streaming down her cheeks. But Razor had already caught the zipper. "Please don't." Her cry rang through the dusty air, but Razor had already pulled. The zipper slid open. The top of the bag sagged. Razor looked inside and he gasped. Not the kind of gasp that came from shock or anger, but the kind that punched straight through a hardened soul and softened something that had once gone cold. Right at the top of the bag, carefully folded and protected by worn pieces of cardboard, was a handwritten note. "To anyone who finds this, if I don't make it, please take care of Emma." Razor felt the ground shift beneath him. He blinked once slowly as the words settled into his mind. An old man's final plea written in shaking letters. Inside the backpack wasn't money or jewelry. No stolen goods, no contraband, nothing criminal, nothing worth a biker gang's suspicion. Instead, there were hospital letters, blood pressure logs, bottles of medications with dates highlighted, insurance forms, and printed instructions for doctors. A small portable heart monitor lay neatly packed in bubble wrap. And beneath that, almost hidden at the bottom, was something that made Razor's throat tighten. A small plastic container with 3 homemade cookies inside. probably packed by a grandfather who believed his little girl might get hungry. Razor straightened slowly. His men peered over his shoulder. Their faces changed, hard stares melting into uneasy realization. Everything they had assumed was wrong. Emma stood frozen, her tears dripping onto the dusty ground. "I couldn't leave anything behind," she whispered. "If the doctors don't see everything, they won't believe how sick he is. Grandpa told me that I had to bring it all." Razor swallowed hard, trying to force down the lump rising in his throat. In that moment, he wasn't the leader of a feared biker gang. He wasn't a man with a reputation forged in rumors and backroom fights. He was just a human being staring at a little girl who had walked miles to save the only family she had in the world. He gently closed the backpack and handed it back to her. "You did good, Emma," he said softly. No sarcasm, no edge, just truth. His men stood silently, some clearing their throats, others suddenly very interested in the ground beneath their boots. Razor placed a large hand on Emma's shoulder. Not to restrain her, but to steady her. "We're taking you to that hospital," he promised. Right now, Emma looked up, stunned, as if she didn't quite believe him. And for the first time that day, she felt something she hadn't felt since her grandfather collapsed. Oh, inside the little blue backpack wasn't money, jewelry, or anything a biker gang would normally care about. There were no valuables to pawn, no electronics to steal, no signs of anything criminal. Instead, what Razor found was something far more powerful, something that didn't need gold or dollar signs to hit like a punch to the chest. At the very top sat a neatly folded piece of paper, worn at the edges from being handled so often. Razor unfolded it with rough fingers, expecting perhaps a list or a reminder, but it was neither. His eyes scanned the shaky handwriting. "To anyone who finds this, if I don't make it, please take care of Emma." For a man who had seen prison cells, broken noses, abandoned houses, and cold hospital floors, Razor had thought he'd built emotional armor too thick to penetrate. He was wrong. The words hit him like a bat to the ribs. His jaw tightened. His breath stopped for a beat. The world around him, bikers, engines, dust, heat, faded into a soft blur. This wasn't the note of a man who gave up. It was the note of a man who had accepted reality, but still loved his granddaughter more than his own fear. Razor felt a small shifting in the darkness behind him. His men were peering over quietly without their usual swagger. Even they could feel the gravity of what was inside that bag. He slowly reached in further and pulled out the next item, a faded photograph. Emma, only a baby, smiling toothlessly in the arms of an older man. Even in the still picture, he looked proud, like holding her was the best thing he had ever done. Razor stared at the picture longer than any of the men expected. None of them dared say a word. Inside the bag were folders stuffed with medical reports, hospital forms stained with highlighter and notes scribbled in a shaky but determined hand, details about medication doses, blood pressure logs, and warnings from doctors. Razor flipped through a page here and there, feeling his stomach twist. How long had Emma been watching her grandfather struggle? He found pill bottles next, rattling softly as he lifted them. The labels showed serious diagnoses, some chronic, some recent. Yet they were neatly organized, rubber-banded so they wouldn't spill. Labels facing upward like someone had carefully arranged them. This little girl hadn't just panicked and run out the door. She had prepared. She had thought ahead. She had packed what mattered, and then Razor's hand brushed against something padded and wrapped carefully in bubble wrap. He lifted it, the small portable heart monitor she had mentioned earlier. The edges were worn as if it had been used many times. Razor held it in his hand, understanding now why she had reacted so violently when he touched the backpack. Losing this could mean the difference between doctors believing her and sending them away. "Boss," one of the bikers murmured behind him, but even he didn't know what to say. At the very bottom of the bag, tucked under everything else, was a small plastic container. Razor popped it open gently and found 3 homemade cookies, slightly broken but still sweet-smelling. Something simple, something thoughtful, something a grandfather would pack because deep down he knew she wouldn't eat until he made sure she could. Razor swallowed hard. His throat felt tight and dry. This wasn't the kind of thing he was used to dealing with. His life was full of broken things, broken bottles, broken promises, broken knuckles. But this was different. This was love. This was desperation. He took a slow breath before speaking. When he did, even his voice sounded different. Lower, softer, stripped of the steel edge he usually carried. "Kid," he began, staring at the little girl who looked ready to either collapse or run. "Why didn't you just flag someone down?" Emma's eyes flickered with shame. "I tried," she whispered. "But nobody stops out here. They see a kid alone and just keep driving." Razor looked up sharply. That was true. People in this town had learned to mind their own business. Sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of apathy. Either way, this kid had been invisible. "People say bikers are dangerous," she continued, her voice wobbling. "So, I thought if you saw me, you might take my stuff." The words stabbed deeper than she knew. Behind Razor, his men shifted uncomfortably. They all heard the same rumors. They'd lived under them for years. They were used to being judged, used to being feared. But hearing it from a kid, a scared, determined girl whose world was falling apart, felt different. Razor didn't argue. He didn't explain. He didn't defend his club. Instead, he gently placed everything back into the backpack with slow, careful movements. He made sure nothing bent or folded improperly. He handled the heart monitor like it was made of glass. He slid the photograph back between the papers where he found it. He refolded the note exactly the way Emma's grandfather had. Then he pulled the zipper up and handed the bag back to her. Not by the strap, but by placing it directly into her hands. She looked stunned, like she wasn't used to adults treating her belongings as something valuable. Razor laid a strong, warm hand on her shoulder. It was heavy but comforting, like someone saying, "You're not carrying this alone anymore." "I'm sorry, Emma," he said quietly. "You've been doing this by yourself for too long." Her lower lip trembled and she sucked in a shaky breath. "We'll take care of this," Razor promised. No hesitation, no doubt, no turning away. And the way he said it made everyone in his crew straighten a little taller. Razor didn't make promises lightly. This wasn't just a ride to the hospital anymore. This was a mission. Emma blinked up at him, trying to swallow her emotions. But the relief in her eyes was unmistakable. For the first time since her world crashed that morning, someone stronger than her was stepping in. Not to take something from her, but to help carry the weight. Razor turned toward his men. "Mount up," he commanded. "We're getting her grandfather to that hospital." Engines began to rumble again, but this time, the sound wasn't threatening. It was powerful, purposeful. Emma clutched her backpack against her chest. Razor stayed beside her as the motorcycles roared to life. Because from this moment on, she wasn't walking that road alone. The engines roared to life again. But this time, the sound wasn't intimidating. It was hopeful. The thunder of motorcycles that once sent people locking their doors and lowering their heads now echoed across the empty road like a rescue siren. It was the sound of a mission, not of rebellion, but of salvation. Razor removed his leather jacket and wrapped it gently around Emma's shoulders so she wouldn't be cold on the ride. Then he lifted her carefully onto the back of his bike. His men watched silently, some adjusting their helmets, others revving their engines in anticipation. No one made jokes. No one smirked. They all understood what was riding with them now. This wasn't cargo. This was a child depending on them. Razor climbed on in front of her and spoke without turning his head. "Hold on tight. You're safe now." Emma nodded, her fingers gripping the back of his vest nervously. She stared up at the sky one last time, hoping her grandfather was still hanging on. Then Razor gave a sharp hand signal. The bikers rolled out. They didn't just ride, they formed a convoy. 2 rode in front, scouting the road, and 2 pulled up on either side of Razor, forming a protective barrier as they sped down the cracked highway. Dust kicked up behind them in long streaks as the wind blew Emma's hair back. Cars that normally ignored cries for help now pulled aside as soon as they saw the formation. People knew better than to block a Hell's Angels pack. But if they looked closely, they would have seen something unusual. A small girl riding safely in the middle, surrounded like royalty. Emma's arms trembled as she held on, not from fear of falling, but from the fear of time running out. Every bump in the road made her heart jump. Every passing second felt like too many. She could hear Razor's men calling out signals over the rumble of engines. Clear ahead, right turn coming, no traffic incoming. Every shout, every coordinated move, every mile covered made the fear in her chest loosen just a little. After 20 long minutes, the hospital finally appeared in the distance. A low brick building with a single ambulance entrance and faded paint. But to Emma, it looked like the gates of heaven. As they rolled into the hospital lot, nurses and doctors stopped in their tracks. It wasn't every day that half a dozen leather-clad bikers formed a shield around a little girl and escorted her to the emergency entrance. Razor swung off the bike before it had fully stopped. Emma leapt down just as two nurses rushed over to help her grandfather out of the sidecar where another biker had kept him steady. "He's not breathing, right?" Emma cried. "Please, help him." The medical team sprang into motion immediately. They loaded the old man onto a stretcher, checked his pulse, installed an oxygen mask, and wheeled him at full speed toward the treatment rooms. Emma reached out instinctively, but Razor caught her hand before she could run after them. "Let them do their job," he said gently. Emma's lower lip trembled. "What if I'm too late?" Razor crouched beside her, looking her square in the eyes. "You weren't too late," he said. "You got him here. That's what matters." She swallowed hard but didn't let go of his hand. Razor didn't pull away. Inside the hospital, minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Emma sat in a stiff plastic chair, Razor beside her, his large calloused hand resting reassuringly on her small one. His men lined the wall, leaning against it silently, staring at their boots or the clock. Men who had survived bar fights and street wars, but suddenly looked like nervous schoolboys outside a principal's office. Emma's mind spun with fear. What if the doctor says they can't help him? What if the monitor wasn't enough? What if she can't live with him anymore? What if she ends up alone? Every dark thought tried to sink its claws into her, but Razor squeezed her hand lightly. "You're not alone anymore," he murmured. That one sentence kept her together. Finally, after what felt like an entire night compressed into 30 minutes, the swinging doors opened. A doctor walked out, still wiping his hands and adjusting his mask. His expression wasn't grim. It was calm. Emma shot to her feet. "Is he okay?" The doctor nodded. "He's stable. You got him here just in time." Emma didn't hear anything after stable. Relief hit her so suddenly that her knees buckled and she burst into tears, loud shaking sobs that tore through her chest. Razor caught her as she stumbled and pulled her close. She wrapped her arms around him and cried into his vest. "Thank you," she whispered between sobs. "I was so scared." Razor cleared his throat, forcing his voice not to crack. He had faced down prosecutors, street rivals, and armed idiots with more confidence than he could handle this little girl's gratitude. "You did good, kid," he said roughly. "You saved him." Word spread faster than wildfire in a small town. Nurses talked. Patients whispered. Visitors took out their phones. By evening, the whole town knew that Razor and his gang had escorted a terrified girl and her dying grandfather to the hospital when nobody else bothered to stop. People who once crossed the street to avoid them now looked with awe instead of fear. Neighbors who used to whisper judgments now nodded respectfully. The simple truth was this: heroes aren't always the people you expect. When Emma's grandfather regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was her sitting beside him holding his hand. The second thing he saw was Razor standing in the doorway, arms crossed, pretending not to look emotional. "Thank you," the old man croaked. Razor shook his head. "She did all the hard work. We just provided the wheels." Over the next few weeks, the biker gang visited regularly. They repaired the broken phone line at Emma's house. They bought groceries. They drove her to school. They even installed a lock and camera system because Razor decided no one that brave should ever feel unsafe again. And Razor, he kept the handwritten note from the backpack, not because he needed to, but because it reminded him of something he once forgot. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it cries. Sometimes it stands alone on a highway, hoping someone will stop. Sometimes it looks like a little girl who refused to give up, no matter the odds. And Razor vowed she would never walk that long road alone.